Welcome to the Science Talent Search Alumni Conversations. I am Maya Ajmera, President and CEO of the Society for Science and publisher of Science News. And I am so thrilled to be here today as we celebrate our 80th anniversary of the Science Talent Search. I'm very much looking forward to talking to two extraordinary program alumni, Nina Shore and Ron Vale. First, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Nina Shore, Deputy Director of the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke at the National Institutes of Health. After winning first prize in STS in 1972, Dr. Shore pursued residency training in pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital and child neurology at the Longwood Area Harvard Neurology Program. A faculty member and administrative leader at the Universities of Pittsburgh and Rochester, she became Deputy Director of NINDS at NIH in 2018. Her research focuses on design and preclinical testing of targeted therapeutic approaches to neuroblastoma, a nervous system cancer of childhood. Nina obtained her BS degree in molecular biophysics and biochemistry from Yale University, her PhD in medical biochemistry from Rockefeller University, and her MD from Cornell University Medical College. Nina, Dr. Shore, it is an honor to have you here today for us to be able to have a conversation about your trajectory, an extraordinary one at that. First, tell us how you're doing this year. It's been a strange and tough year. How has that been at NIH and for yourself personally?
Yeah, this has been, I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't say it's been a challenging year. Certainly a different year than any other. I mean, the short answer is I'm doing well, and I'm learning things that I never knew I would even care to learn. I play a role at NIH that's such that I work 99% of the time now from home. Because I play primarily an administrative role and a facilitating kind of role rather than the in the trenches role that I played earlier in my career. I think the biggest difference for me is really two things that I have my days when I think they're just fine, and I have my other days when I think I wish I could turn back the clock.
So let's go back. Let's go back to 1972, where you won first place, and you were the first young woman to win first place, an exciting accomplishment to discuss, especially during Women's History Month, frankly. Tell us a bit about your project. What brought you to the Science Talent Search? Like, what was that inspiration to get you there? And tell us about the week you spent.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful memory, honestly. And what brought me there, what brought me to doing scientific research, I think even when I was a little kid, I was always doing scientific research of a sort. I mean, I always was thrilled with the notion of generating information that nobody else ever had, or asking a question that nobody else ever thought to ask. I was always mixing things together and wondering what would happen to the color or what have you. I think my parents were worried something would explode someday in the kitchen. So it was very natural for me as a high school student when our biology teachers announced that they were going to start a biology research class. It was very, very natural for me to join that class. It was an elective class. And that was where I formulated the project that I used as my Westinghouse project, my Science Talent Search project. And it grew out of the initial part of the class. The whole first semester had us going to bio abstracts, which of course then were all hard copy. You had to find a library that you could access bio abstracts and to try to pose a question that perhaps you could at least formulate a plan for generating an answer from what you found in the literature. Methods, techniques, and
so what was the title of your project?
So it was the effects of aldehydes on the chlorophyll content of Euglena gracilis. And so the idea was aldehydes were very, very prominent constituents of car exhaust. And Euglena gracilis is an organism that people still today think of as being at the interface between plants and animals. It has chlorophyll and it does respiration like a plant would, and yet it is modal like an animal would be, moves around in the water in which you put it, very much like an animal would. And so I thought, maybe this is a model both for what happens to plant life and to animal life when exposed to the pollutants that come from car exhaust.
So you got to Washington, D.C. You became one of the top 40 finalists. What was that like?
Yeah, so it honestly, it started, the excitement of that experience started before coming to DC because aside from the competition, I had never been on an airplane before. And so I got to fly the big flight from New York City to Washington, D.C. And even that was, just for me, was an adventure. My father had flown. My mother had never been on an airplane before. So just even seeing me off was exciting for them. The week was amazing, truly amazing in so many different ways. I know many of the students in my group felt like they finally met other students who enjoyed science. And I think that's a theme even
found
today.
Your people.
Right. I mean, for me, I happened to be in a high school, was a regular New York City high school, but there were lots of other kids who were kind of nerdy like I was, and we all hung around together. So that wasn't as much a revelation for me, but to see that those kids also had interests in music and in poetry and in art and had other talents. I mean, that was really exciting. I remember spending one evening with Dorothy Shriver, who was kind of I thought of her as our den mother for the week. I mean, she just really looked after us. And we all sat around a piano with her, and I played the piano, and a bunch of people sang, and people brought out instruments that they had shoved in their suitcases. It was totally fun. The notion that you could be a credible scientist, good enough to make it in a competition like the Westinghouse and still have outside interests was very exciting to me. And then the arrangements involved having us meet with some people whose names I only saw in textbooks. I mean, it was just remarkable to me that those people saw fit to take time out of their day to talk to a high school student. And that truly, that example is a lesson that I have taken with me for the rest of my career, that the thing that I think of now as not a big deal, I'll spend an hour with this student talking to them about their project, may in fact be a very big deal for that student.
That's right. So how did it feel to have your name called to be the first place winner. And I believe this was the 30th anniversary of the Westinghouse Science Talent Search because we were founded in 1942. I believe this was 1972, so that's 30 years.
Right.
That's a big deal. What was that like for you to win first place?
Oh, it was surreal. I mean, it was, I was at and there was no internet, there was no leaking of information or what have you. There was a banquet, and each table had one of the 40 winners at it. And then a lot of, people who were, like I say, luminaries in their fields. They were either scientists or there were legislators sitting at the table. I mean, I kind of felt like the only little kid sitting at this very fancy grown-up dinner table. And they started announcing from the 10th place winner, and they did the second place. And I just thought, well, I've just had a wonderful week, and I've met some incredible people, some of whom I know I'm going to keep in touch with as time goes on. And I got to go to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology and, talk to all the neuropathologists. I just thought, what's the difference whether you win a prize or not? And then when they called my name, I felt like I wasn't really there. It was almost as if I was watching this happen to someone else. It was truly remarkable.
Well, again, congratulations, and paving the way for young women to aspire to know that they could win first place too. And we've had several first place women that have won after you. So that is just great. So what was the greatest impact that the Science Talent Search experience had on you, and how did you leverage it in your, professional career and as well as personal? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest impact was just at that very early, very formative stage of my career to send the message to me. And it was STS and all the people outside of STS that I met in Washington that week, to send the message that people that had made science their career and that had achieved a great deal in the context of that career actually thought that I had what it took to make it, that they would feel good somehow about welcoming me to their profession. That was, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family where we used to call my father a suffragette. And I had a sister, and he would say to the two of us, there isn't anything you can't do. Just think about what it is you want to do and whatever. But it never came from outside. It never came from people that hadn't known me. Of course, my parents would say that. But to hear it from professionals who didn't know me in a personal context was very exciting and very empowering to me.
So, Dr. Short, as the first female, right, to win first place, have you seen the access to the field of science grow for women? And would you say that there's still more work to be done in the field of science and engineering from the perch you sit on now and looking, across the country and around the world?
Without any question, yes to both of those. I think we've made enormous strides. And, every time there's some microaggressive little comment made somewhere, it's easy to forget how far we have come. We hear those comments now sitting at a table to which we would have had no access 5 years ago. So I think we have made enormous progress, and we have raised the consciousness of people who, in fact, in the past were not necessarily negative or antagonistic, but just didn't think about it, didn't occur to them as an issue. I think all of that is to the good and has improved the likelihood that a young woman interested in science is going to be welcomed into a career in that area, or even that a young woman would think of becoming a scientist. The flip side of that is there's a lot of work to do. I think part of it, and in some ways, the least of our worries is the sort of snide remark and the thing that gets swept under the table during the meeting, muttered under somebody's breath. I mean, that's unpleasant, but then you just kind of put it out of your mind and go and do what you need to get done. I do think that women, though, are still very much stereotyped and almost typecast in roles. And I've actually looked at this in a couple of research studies where I've looked at, let's look at women that have become leaders at academic institutions. What kind of roles do they play? And they overwhelmingly play roles in teaching or in public relations or in community relations, and much less frequently play roles in corporate decision-making or finance or research, for that matter. And so I think we've opened the door and, we've gotten into the room, and now we have to have access to every single table that's sitting in that room, and we're not quite there yet.
So let me shift a bit, and I want to, you have a major leadership role as the Deputy Director, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. Tell me about your work in the area of neuroscience, and especially the work you've done in pediatrics. Very important, groundbreaking work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I always tell students that I went into neuroscience and neurology for intellectual reasons. It was what interested me. It was what excited me. It was what felt like I could make an impact because there was so little known when I got started. But I went into the pediatric part of that field almost for social reasons. I think when I asked myself with whom I would like to spend every minute of every long, hard day, the answer was children. And so I think at a sort of gut level, that was what drove me into pediatric neurology and developmental neuroscience. I think at a sort of more scholarly level, at the time I got started, adult neurology was already very, very much steeped in neuroscience. And pediatric neurology was very phenomenological. People just described what they saw. And the answer to why did you make this diagnosis was, well, I saw 5 other kids and that's what they had. So this kid looks the same as those. And very little was being done in the realm of mechanism. And I really thought that bringing mechanistic thinking, bringing an understanding of biochemical principles to child neurology, that I could make a difference that hadn't yet been made in that field. It was interesting that many of my professors and mentors in medical school said, you're going to have a PhD, you're so interested in research and in inquiry and in scholarship, why would you go into something like pediatrics? I mean, pediatrics is camp checkups and immunizations. And, honestly, the answer is, well, I'm not even sure that it was that even back then. But the fact of the matter is, it shouldn't be any less scholarly or steeped in information and data and inquiry than adult medicine. And so because it was less that way, I stood to make a bigger difference in that field by bringing that kind of thinking to the field.
Dr. Shore, just two more questions because we're running out of time, and I wish I could just be with you and just have a cup of coffee or cup of tea to just talk, and maybe someday that will happen very soon. But I want to just talk to you about failures, right? You know, scientists have failures in the laboratory all the time, and I'm always telling young people, learn from your failures. Don't be afraid of them. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Absolutely. I will tell you that there are two kinds of failures that come to my mind, and they are, for better or for worse, very plentiful in my career history. I think the first and the most tangible are the failures when you send a paper to a journal or you send a grant to be funded, and clearly the editors and the reviewers don't think as highly of what you wrote as you do, or didn't understand what you wrote. I find that even now, my initial response to that is a very emotional, very spur of the minute kind of response, because I don't send something in unless I think it's really good. And I'm not ready to send it in until I have poured weeks and weeks of myself into that manuscript or that grant application. I find it really useful to glance at it for a few minutes, get the gist of it, get that emotional reaction, put it in a desk drawer for a week so I can calm down and think rationally about it, and then come back to it and say, what can I learn from this? You know, what did they not get because I didn't explain it adequately? Not because it's a bad idea, but because I didn't put into words adequately what I need them to know. What fact did I leave out? The other kind of failure, I guess, although I at this point in my career, I don't think of it as a failure, tends to come when I would be in the laboratory and be working in the sort of straight and narrow path, the question, each one following from the previous answer, and then get an idea that's a little off the beaten track. You know, in an area, I'll read a paper and I'll say, oh, that's just like what I've been working on in this field. Maybe I should do an experiment over here. And because that's not the area in which I'm expert, it only pans out about 50% of the time, maybe even less than that.
So my last question is, what advice, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received and you may want to share with our audience?
Yeah, so, you know, I think particularly for people that are extraordinarily good and successful in science, there is a tendency of the rest of the world to say, I want that person as an administrative leader. I want that person to be the division chief, the chair, the director of the institute, whatever. And clearly I love doing that kind of thing. But I think the best advice I ever got was not to do that before I had established very firmly what my piece of the scientific universe was and who I was in that context. I think once you become an administrative leader, it's not about you anymore. And your success is measured in the success of those you mentor and those you lead. And if you do that too early in your career, and the timing is different for everybody, but if you do that before you know who you are, then you resent the time those people take away from what you could have done. And so I think the best advice I got was be flattered, thank whoever offers you whatever, but make sure that you don't do it until you are ready to give up a piece of yourself for someone else's success.
Well, Dr. Shorenina, it has been such an honor to take
a real pleasure for me
to speak to you today. As we celebrate our 80th anniversary, I can't think of just a better person and role model for young people to hear your story. So it's a great honor, and thank you so much for having a chance to talk to me today. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Ron Vale, Vice President of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, HHMI, and Executive Director of the Janelia Research Campus. Ron is a 1976 alum of the Science Talent Search. Before joining HHMI and Janelia, Ron was a faculty member on the University of California, San Francisco Department of Cellular and Molecular Pharmacology, renowned cell biologist and pioneer in the field of molecular motors, the tiny biological machines that can ferry cargo across cells. He's also a founder and entrepreneur of several biotech companies and nonprofit organizations. Ron is the recipient of the 2017 Shaw Prize in Life Sciences and the 2012 Lasker Award in Basic Medical Research. He was elected to the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Medicine, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Ron received his bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and his PhD in neuroscience from Stanford University. Dr. Vale, Ron, it is such an honor to have you here today and to share your words of wisdom to our audience. But first, I just want to say it has been an intense year this year. How are you doing?
Well, I'll get into that, but first of all, thank you, Maya, for the invitation. And I must say, I have incredibly wonderful memories of the Science Talent Search, and it was such an influential part of my life. And somehow that path, it's a journey that started then and through many steps that you mentioned, eventually landed me as executive director of Janelia Research Campus, which is part of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And I started a year ago, and you might remember that about a year ago was the start of the pandemic. So it's been an interesting year, I must say a difficult one. Moving and leading an institute of 700 people through an incredibly challenging time. So it's been a year of incredible responsibility. Also a year to try to promote resilience and optimism. And yes, but it's been exciting to start this new big job here at Janelia.
Well, Janelia is a beautiful campus. It's just awe-inspiring, actually, and what an incredible position you have. And as they say, disruption drives ingenuity. So perhaps there are going to be some great things that come out of discoveries that come out from this year from Janelia's campus. But let's go back a bit. So both your parents come from more artistic backgrounds, I believe in acting and screenwriting. What drove your curiosity and interest into science as a child?
Well, Maya, as you mentioned, my mother was an actress, at least earlier in her life and career. My father was a novelist and screenplay writer. And I would say what nucleated my interest in science was that my wonderful mom um, took me to museums when I was very young. And this was in Los Angeles. And I just fell in love with them. I mean, I was probably very young, 5 or 6 years old. And, I just, it was just wondrous, just wandering around and seeing the dinosaurs or the stars and I think that sense of wonder is a really important part of science, and it maybe got me hooked even at that age. Um, but I can also add that, my parents, they were artists, but they were also like scholars and interested and curious about everything. Very interestingly, neither one of them went to college. It was during the time of World War II. It just was not possible. But they read all the great books. They knew about, you know, masters of philosophy or religion, but also science. They were deeply curious about science as well. I went to classes actually with extension classes with my father at UCLA on astronomy and cosmology. So I guess that they also sparked my just general curiosity and scholarship. So I'm very grateful to my parents for all that they gave me that, really kind of helped me on my own personal journey.
So your parents were lifelong learners, which is absolutely critical, right?
They were lifelong learners, and they also taught me it's not about college. It's really about how to learn to be interested in learning, and that one can be self-educate oneself. And I saw that through my parents, and I think that's a really important message for any of the students that are out there, whatever school you're at, or even if you're not in school or you're past school. It's really about carrying the spirit of being curious and wanting to learn things. And just getting a degree is, not necessarily the answer for that. You have to find your own passion for learning and carry that with you through your life.
So let's move to the Science Talent Search, 1976. Tell us a bit about your project. What was it like to attend STS in Washington, D.C.? And what impact did that experience have on you as and the leverage it created for you as you move through your professional life? So
yeah, I'll try to be brief. I'll give you a little bit of the background up
sure.
to STS.
Yes.
I was in a high school that I would say was not very particularly academic. Most kids were not. In fact, hardly any kids were interested in science. I did the mandatory required biology, science fair project. I remember actually getting a fairly mediocre grade on that. So that's another lesson. I think I got a B, and I'm still like, look back at that and wonder why did I get a B. But anyway, the most important thing was um, I was really into it myself, the science fair project. I set up my basement as a little laboratory to study biological clocks. So the project was about how living organisms tell time, and in this case, it was a bean plant, which you might know that in the daytime the leaves are up, but at nighttime the leaves drop down. And believe it or not, even without a light or dark cycle, the bean plant will move its leaves up and down according to a circadian approximately 24-hour clock. So I built a little device in my basement to study it, and I started to look at the effects of changing light and dark cycles to see if I could fool the bean plant into following also a different rhythmic pattern other than the 24-hour cycle if I change the light and dark. So that was, the genesis of it. And, eventually that got submitted to STS. And I would say that I owe my science counselor, I didn't even know that existed. So my science counselor encouraged me to apply for it. And I did, and presented it there. And, I would say that was totally transformational for me in several ways. I mean, one, it was the second time I'd ever been out of my state. And, just going to Washington, D.C. was an eye-opener. But and then the second eye-opener was, as I mentioned, I came from a school where it was not celebrated being academic. And in fact, it was like one of those things kind of in my peer group, one almost had to hide a little bit. And it was amazing to be with peers who also shared this incredible enthusiasm for science. And
you found your people. You found your people.
I found my people. I didn't know where they were, but I found them. And it was exhilarating, to be with a group of peers that were so stimulating. And I came away saying, wow, this could be really fun if I'm with this group of people, throughout my life and career. I did find my people. And, of course, the other thing was just the energy of the event and all these incredible scientists that you got to talk to. I kind of was in this more isolated environment where I was kind of exploring my own personal passion for science. And I think STS kind of celebrated it and cemented that for the rest of my life.
How did that leverage you professionally? As you said, you were the first to go to college. How did that impact your life? I'm just curious about that.
Well, I mean, it certainly affected my ability to get, scholarships. Actually, my parents at that time were divorced. My mom had actually very little money. I could not have gone to school, even a state school. And, I probably would have got financial aid anyway, but, I mean, certainly I got accepted into Stanford full scholarship, UCSB full scholarship, and I decided to go there over Stanford. So, I mean, it certainly helped me that way. But I also do want to make a remark. I did not finish in the top 10 of that.
And being in the top 40 is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. And, to some extent, even if you don't make it all the way to the top 40, I think even...
I was in the top 300, Ron. So
yeah. So I think that's a very important message to get out there. It's not just about where you finish placing. It's about kind of the experience from the very, very beginning of just your own discovery process of science and I think that can really help you in your journey, whatever level you make it to.
So not only are you a scientist, you're a social entrepreneur. You have founded two nonprofits, I believe, XBio and iBiology, which aim to make science knowledge more accessible by providing scientific text resources to students free of charge. So tell me, how do you see this work contributing to increased access to students in low-income communities and increasing the likelihood that students will commit to STEM fields in the long term?
Well, I've been interested in this since, 2006 to try to make, science accessible to everyone. To be brief, it first started when I traveled 2,000 miles to India to give a seminar. And that was, actually maybe in 2005. And I realized I traveled halfway around the world to talk to the most elite institute in India, and realizing that there's a country of 1 billion people here, most of whom will never have any access to a leading scientist and hear about their work. And that just struck me as fundamentally wrong. And, if we're investing, hundreds of billions in life science research as we are in academics and industry combined, then it's kind of almost our moral, ethical obligation to, explain what science is and make it accessible to everyone, not just the select group. So that's what started iBiology. More recently, I've also become impassioned to make that quality access available to all like high school and college students. The textbook right now at $300 or more is just simply not accessible to many students. It's a huge burden that we're placing on them. And beyond that, beyond even the cost, we're not exciting students about, the wonder of science and even what it means to be a scientist. Being a scientist is not about learning facts. It's about being an explorer. It's about being a discoverer. It's learning how to ask questions and solve problems. And that's the best part of science. And I think sadly we're teaching students a lot of facts, and we're not really teaching them what science is. And that's the hook, I think, to get students interested in science. And I should say, whether they end up becoming scientists or not is not the important part. It's about having students, gain some understanding of what science is and getting some appreciation. And I think too many students are going into introductory science classes and becoming disillusioned and not wanting to have science be part of their lives going forward. And I think we just need to change that too.
Well, STEM education in this country at the public school level is pretty dismal. And if you look at the statistics, it's very poor in terms of even the quality of teaching, but also just the quality of resources. And so what you've produced with XBio and iBiology is just an extraordinary gift and something we are promoting to our 20,000 STEM teachers across the country. So thank you for your service in that. I want to move from the social entrepreneurship piece to being a biotech entrepreneur. So tell me about that. You're an entrepreneur and also an academic, but tell me about that piece. And has that been successful? And there's always, in science, there's always failure. So I'm just curious as to that piece of your work.
Yeah, I just want to say in all these journeys are long, first of all, and they require a lot of persistence and patience. And I also do want to say even the reinventing a new biology textbook, which is what you refer to as XBio, we're at the start of that journey. It will be a 10-year journey to realize that vision fully of what I imagine it can do for students around the world. So I do hope that also interested students and teachers will contact me. And if there's those on, listening to this, it's going to be a journey of the community. So feel free to contact me. But on to biotech. I'm a very kind of, in some ways, pure biologist. I love just asking questions for the interest of understanding how life works. And I do think that's also the foundation of a lot of practical advances, whether it's like CRISPR technology, what came from understanding strange phenomena in bacteria, and now it's changing medicine. Virtually all of the advances in medicine start with asking very basic questions about how life works. But, that said, a few times in my research, asking basic questions led to a point where we can now think of practical applications. That's wonderful. It's very exciting when one's research can potentially help.
Can you give an example, Ron? Can you give an example?
Yeah, well, the first company I founded was along with Larry Goldstein, Jim Sputich, and James Sabry was Cytokinetics.
Oh.
We were studying motor proteins, as you mentioned, little tiny machines that move things inside of cells or make your muscles contract, that make sperm swim around. These are little machines that create motion. And, through many years, I mean, our lab, but the whole field began to understand them better. There was no company working in this space at all at the time. Motor protein wasn't even the lexicon of pharmaceutical industry, but we saw some potential of how it can, help patients. And so founded a company, and now there are many clinical trials going on in this company and actually others, for heart failure, for children that have genetic defects in some of these motor proteins. And that's exciting. More recently, ended up, again, our research led to some interesting areas in neurodegeneration and another with cancer immunotherapy. And that in the last, actually a couple of years led to founding new companies, which are now in earlier stages of Series A. So it means the companies are just getting off the ground. And that's a super exciting time for both of those companies.
That's very exciting. So you are a multiple juggler of your nonprofit enterprise, your biotech enterprises, leading Genelia. Are you still operating a lab of your own at Genelia, or are you now in the leadership position and administrating more than doing research on the bench?
Well, I'm still a bit in transition. My main lab still resides in UCSF in San Francisco, and they're kind of finishing up in the coming year. And then after they finish, I'm kind of moving and starting a new lab here at Genelia. I actually have one person here at Genelia who's kind of nucleating that lab right now as a very brave postdoc. But I really want to keep my interest in science directly. I think that actually will make me better as an administrator and make me better in these other efforts. It's still a joy of mine, so I don't want to lose touch with that. And obviously, as you see, I have a pretty busy life, and I have some other activities that I started, like kind of effectively nonprofit in India too, and another one on scientific publishing. But, the good thing is a lot of these things now, when you start things and you identify really, really good people and then give them ownership and pass the empowerment to them, then
magical things happen.
Yeah, good things happen. Then they develop lives of their own. And it's not just about the project, but it's also about getting other people excited and involved and having them take these efforts forward too.
So my last question, and I wish I had a couple of hours to talk to you, but my last question is, what's the best piece of advice you've gotten that you'd want to share with the audience in sort of your professional journey?
Well, let's see. I mean, that's a lot of things I could say. I mean, I would say maybe let's go back to a theme that we already started. Enjoy what you're doing. It's so important, and I feel so lucky and privileged to find, a profession that I'm passionate about. I mean, maybe it's a profession, but I would say it's kind of a love of science that I've been fortunate to craft, a very multivarious career around. I think if your foundation, your core foundation is, finding something that you really love, that's such a wonderful foundation that also keeps a compass for you through the ups and downs. You mentioned failure. It's inevitable, or things don't always go the way you expect. But, if you can keep what's true to you alive and as a compass, that's such an amazing thing. That may be science, that may be something else. It may be education. It could be other things that young people want to do in this world.
Being an artist. Yep.
Whatever it is, I think that's what's, really important. And it should be our job as more senior people to clear the path for young people so that they can do great things in the world and look to us as mentors for their own journeys.
Well, Ron, Dr. Vale, what a treat it has been to have this time to just to reminisce, but to also talk about your present work. We're just so delighted. And how cool is it that you came to Washington, D.C. for a science talent search in 1976 and what you're doing today as the president and CEO of the Society for Science. We're incredibly pleased and proud. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for the amazing work that you and your society does to stimulate so many young people. It's fantastic. And also look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thank you.
Dr. Shore, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Good, good. Dr. Shore, we've gotten one question already coming in. You are a published poet. I believe someone has found that out about you. How do you see your work in poetry intersecting with your professional work in medicine?
That's an interesting question. I think on the one hand, writing poetry has always been for me a release, an ability to disconnect from the tangible events that are going on around me and think at some philosophical higher plane for a little bit. It's a relaxation in a way. And I think that that's in some ways an important point for people that are going to go into a career as intense as science or medicine, that you have to have a hobby, a release, or something that lets you be you. And but I think in some ways the deeper answer and the connection between the two are that you do science because you realize that things are not always what they seem to be on the surface. And so you dig deeper and sometimes find very, very surprising things that were not intuitively obvious from the beginning. And I think writing in poetry instead of writing in prose is exactly the same phenomenon. A poem is not what it seems to be on the surface. The words say something deeper and broader than the actual physical words on the paper, and you have to think about it for a little bit before you uncover what a poem actually is trying to tell you. Mother Nature is exactly the same as a poem. I think she writes in poetry.
Well, that's wonderful. I got a question. Is Dr. Vale on audio?
I think so.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Dr. Vale, we have a question for you. I hope you're doing well. You are somewhat of, the question that's come in is, you are somewhat of a triple threat, having worked in academia, industry, and the nonprofit sector. In what ways do each of these work environments inspire you and help you continue to generate ideas?
Well, I think they're all very different. I think that's the interesting thing about it. I think the challenges of, just what you're trying to do in academics is, to develop basic knowledge. And in industry, you're trying to develop ways to take that knowledge and apply it to, practical outcomes that, benefit other people. And, in nonprofits, you're on a different part of the equation of, I would just say, doing, some general public good. And, the challenges in each one of these, even though they're all based on science, which is interesting, require their own form of creativity. And I would say I've learned a lot from doing each one of them, but, even the skills from one play over to the other in very interesting ways. So, I always like challenges, and I suppose each one provides its own.
So we have another question coming, I believe, from a parent, and I believe you're both parents because I have heard you say that. But the question is, how have you passed on? How have you passed on and instilled a love of science and curiosity in your own children? And as a parent myself, I would love to hear that. So, Nina, I'll start with you, and then Ron.
So, as my kids were growing up, I had some friends and neighbors who had made the choice. Usually it was the wife, but not always. One parent had made the choice to stay home with the children and make that their life's work. I had other friends who continued to work outside the home, but were constantly worried that they were shortchanging their children. And so what they did, most of them would carve out what they called quality time with their children that was sacrosanct, so that no work could go on in those moments. I think both my husband and I felt very strongly that part of who we are as people is what we do at work, and maybe that relates in some ways to what Ron actually so eloquently said about doing something that you love. I mean, doing science as a career is kind of a way of life, much more than it is a job. It's something much larger than a job. It's part of who you are and the way you approach the world and the way you think. And so my husband and I always felt strongly that we shouldn't hide that from our children, that should be part of what we do with our kids. And so often we would all I have 3 children, and the 5 of us would be in the same room, each doing what our work was for that evening. And it was very common for me to be making slides for a talk, and to invite my children to come over and look at the PowerPoint and choose the background color for the slides or whatever they were capable of doing at that point. When they got older, I would say, look at this diagram and tell me what you think it conveys. And sometimes they wouldn't get it, and I would realize I had to redraw that diagram because it wasn't clear enough. So I think that what made my kids, and actually 2 of them are in science, but one is a lawyer. So they didn't all go into science, but they all went into fields where they have to deduce things from inadequate information sometimes, where they have to be creative, where they feel that they give back to the world that gave to them. So I think the key to it was just including them in everything that we did.
Thank you. Ron, what about you?
Well, I mean, just to say that, as you mentioned early in the interview, my, parents were from the artistic and literature world, and I made the choice not to pursue that career. I think often, children do that, and that should be celebrated too. And I would say, our daughter is, interested in, other things. She sees a planet that needs help environmentally, people that are disadvantaged, in the United States and around the world. And, science can help with some of that, but it's not the full answer. Solutions to many of these are really human and social problems. And, we need a whole generation of people that are willing to tackle the problem from that perspective as well. So, that's her passion. That's what she wants to do. And, and as I said, that difference is to be celebrated too.
Well, that advice from both of you is just so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I know there are many parents listening, and this came obviously from a parent. Dr. Shore, Nina, there's a question here for you. To what extent do you believe the pandemic has affected children in terms of neurology, neurological deficits, given your experience in the field, if at all?
Yeah, I think in some ways there are two ways to answer that. The first is for children that before the pandemic had nervous system generated challenges, children with autism, children with cerebral palsy, children who need special input or environments in school. This has been an extraordinarily difficult time for those children and their families. A child who depends upon school for the therapy that they need, or who depends on special equipment, or who needs attention all the time, and a parent goes to work only because the child is able to go to a school that can accommodate their specific needs. And so I think the setbacks for children who are neurologically challenged have been enormous. And I think it says something very powerful about, as we formulate plans for pandemic preparedness, as I keep hearing from my infectious disease colleagues, for the next pandemic, because the viruses are not going to have a moratorium after this one. We need to include in that, what do we do to maintain the progress of children and adults, for that matter, who have challenges that are not going to be met unless we have an emergency preparedness plan that includes the needs of those individuals. I think the other side of the coin is that I always think of mental health and learning as being neurological phenomena. And I don't think there's a child on the planet right now who hasn't had to at least change, and maybe for most of them delay, their interaction with peers, their acquisition of knowledge and learning. I think it remains to be seen exactly what form this is going to take, and how kids are going to catch up in that realm, and socially and sort of attitudinally, what that is going to do to children.
Thank you. Ron, this is a question for you. I'm going to assume maybe coming from a teacher. Your nonprofits, iBiology, the question is, are there any thoughts that you're having or thinking around scaling that work, thinking about how you include the newest aspects of biology and science into the work, and how well has that scaled nationally?
Well, iBiology, I should say, in its original form, was directed more towards, I would say, advanced college, or certainly college, graduate student, and postdoc level. In some ways, it has scaled well, I would say nationally and internationally. Like anything, scaling just takes a lot of time and commitment and persistence, but well, before pandemic, if I would travel to India or China or some other place internationally, I would find more people would know about iBiology than my work necessarily. So,
oh, that's interesting.
yeah, so it's good to see it actually reach audiences internationally where it needed to be. My future, and again, this may take a decade, but goal is, to replace the biology textbook for college, but who knows, maybe for high school. And with the two key elements I already talked about in the interview, which is actually getting kids excited about understanding what science is as a process of discovery rather than a sea of facts, and making that knowledge accessible. Now, replacing the current conception of a textbook is a massive aspirational undertaking. Obviously, textbooks have been used as the currency of education for decades. So scaling it, I think the only way to do it is actually to take a whole new approach to the problem, and that is, make it a community effort where many teachers, many scientists, many students actually, feel that it's also their project and they contribute to it, and it's part of, it's not just my project or a project of a specific publisher or a project even of a specific institution. It becomes a project of the community. I think that's the most likely ingredient for scaling and success. And, we're just at the start of that journey. But, one thing, I'm sure Nina agrees, like anything good, also in science, one of the main characteristics of success is just being persistent. And, there will be sometimes hardship, and sometimes you feel you're not getting there fast enough, but kind of the spirit of having like a compass and sticking with it is really important.
Well, Ron, I've got to share something with you. We heard from a finalist just now that they used the Genelia databases for their STS project. So that is a great way to end this Q&A session, because I want to make sure that both of you get to visit the exhibit hall online and visit with the kids, because all the finalists have been listening in and they're all asking, is Dr. Shore and Dr. Vale going to be visiting our project? So I hope you will get a chance to do that. But again, the 40 Regeneron STS finalists will be available for chatting between 2 and 4 p.m. today. And the exhibit hall will be open till the end of March. Dr. Shore, Nina, Dr. Vale, Ron, thank you so very, very much for the extraordinary conversation I had with both of you, and just being open to the questions that were coming through. It has been an incredible treat, and like I said, I hope someday we get to break bread together in person. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Great, and thank you, for me as well. And again, thanks for all the great work that you do for so many students.